Casual Magic has been sponsored by Quiver, maker of the Quiver and Bolt deck cases and other fine deck holding accessories. Use the code CASUAL on their website for 10% off your order. We're also sponsored by Architect, the premier site for hosting your decks on the internet. I love them and they love me, and it seems like a good reason for you to use them. You can also support Casual Magic directly by going to our Patreon at patreon.com/ShivamB. And now, on with the show. Hello and welcome to Casual Magic, the show where we talk about the fun side of Magic the Gathering. My name is Shivam, Bhatt, and Casual Magic is brought to you by Cool Stuff, Architect, and Quiver, and also on my Patreon at patreon.com/ShivamB. Today I have a very interesting guest, my friend Chief, who I've known from Discord and stuff. He's the media lead for the PlayEDH Discord server, and one of the people who helped, Commander and Magic really just thrive through the pandemic lockdowns when we were all trying to figure out how to handle playing online. And the reason I have him on is because in the RC's Discord, we have had a lot of really interesting philosophical discussions on what is the nature of Commander and on what is the nature of playing with other people. And one of the things that PlayEDH did that I both like and dislike, but that's neither here nor there, is that in order to facilitate playing over the course of pandemic time, when we didn't have a lot of ability to Rule Zero, talk to each other, before even Rule Zero, I guess, existed, they had their own little scale for these are the sort of broad boxes that your decks can fit into. These are the sort of categories so that if we put you guys in these two boxes together, you will be able to play a game at relative power parity. I don't know how well that worked or didn't work. That's a discussion for somebody else. But what it did do is it helped at least give people a baseline to work off of, and also the ability to play with each other, which in an era when we just couldn't go to the store was vital. And the fact that somebody did it at all is commendable and incredibly important. But Chief and I have had a lot of discussions back and forth over the past couple of years about a lot of what this means and how we sort people out. And I thought we would come together today to talk a little bit about Rule Zero and about what it means to kind of try to find a way to have a balanced conversation and a balanced play in your tabletop Commander games. And thanks for joining me today, buddy. I really appreciate it.
Oh, well, the pleasure's all mine. I'm really excited to be here. It's actually maybe a surprise that I've never actually been invited on a podcast before, but I'm also not really trying to be a big name, famous content creator, internet celebrity for Magic the Gathering.
Look, the content farm is hungry, and I will talk to anybody I can talk to who wants to talk to me. But more than that, I wanted you here because I think you have interesting things to say. And there's a lot of content creators I've talked to who don't have interesting things to say, and you guys don't hear those episodes. But it's talking on a podcast is a challenge. It's you have to have one of the things that people come to me all the time and they're like, hey, I want to be on your show. And I'm like, do you have an hour's worth of content about whatever you want to talk about? And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. And sometimes their force of personality is enough that I can just get away with the conversation. And sometimes it isn't. But you have seen a lot and had a lot of experience with vast numbers of strangers getting together to play Commander. So I wanted to pick your brain and think about what you think about how it is that people can come together and play.
So one of the things that PlayEDH does, and I'm going to just give some background on what PlayEDH is in case there's somebody who doesn't know what it is. In 2017, a group of people were trying to play Commander over Zoom and stuff like that. And it originally started as a Skype group, but then it moved over to Discord. And Siggy from the Lab Maniacs early cEDH content creation group is actually the founder of PlayEDH. And the premise of PlayEDH over time went from being, hey, we're a group of people who want to meet each other to play, to we open this up and more people can join and play here. And then eventually to a system that uses a curated power level rating system to help people find better matchmaking for like commander pickup games. Still on Zoom and Whereby for a while, but eventually on virtual EDH, which was created by a guy who played on PlayEDH, that eventually turned into Spell Table, which was eventually acquired by Wizards of the Coast. So, like, PlayEDH has different power levels, like Battle Cruiser is the lowest power level, and then Max Power is the highest power level. And then in the middle of those, you have low power, mid power, and high power. And each of those kind of scales up, and there's different things you can expect depending on what power level you're playing. Where like max power is going to be like a cEDH type game, but Battle Cruiser is going to be like precons and like decks that someone made that are like on a similar power level to a commander precon, if that makes sense.
The thing is, we used to be able to say, oh yeah, it's precon tier, but the precons since Zendikar Rising have gotten really, really good. And even in the past last year or so, I would say some of the precons can actually just straight up beat some of my better constructed decks. And because they can cheat by making cards that are specifically perfect for them, whereas I can't make cards for my deck. But like, I think we as a community need to actually sit and think about what we mean by like precon tier power level, because I think Watsy got the message that precons should be able to play in a store against other people and not just get crushed. So like pre 2016 precons, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really disagree with you that there are exceptions because like the Secret Lair heads coin flipping one, that is not on the power level of the average precon, and that's actually doesn't fall in that power level. And then the
The
Angel
Warhammer precons.
precon with Brazella that makes it so that some decks can't even play if it fuses Brazella together because the mana value of all the spells is low. Like those are actually rated for low power on PlayEDH. I don't really play Battle Cruiser, but our Battle Cruiser community seems to feel that the precons from the earlier era can still win in that power level, even with lower precons. So, like, maybe you have more insight on that than I do because I don't usually play with precons. But that's what they say, that they still feel like they hold up. So, I
Yeah.
mean, I'd have to defer to them because I'm not an expert. I play a lot of different power levels of Commander, going from like a lower power casual, higher power casual, and then like cEDH as well. But I've never really played like precon games heavily myself.
I love precon commander. I really genuinely do, because I like having a deck handed to me and then try and solve the puzzle of the deck. Deck construction is fun and interesting sometimes, but I just like that when you play precons against each other, there is a fixed power level and you are just now able to enjoy a game. It feels more like a board game. And also I just like that they make decks and themes so that I don't have to. And I can just be like, oh, I want to see what a Foretell deck would be like without having to invest in it or anything like that. Um, but like it was funny, like the one or two times I played on PlayEDH, my most powerful deck I had at the time, my Apatra deck, was like upper mid tier, just with a handy like they're like if you take your Gaia's Cradle out, you're basically mid tier, and I'm like my most powerful deck that I use to finish games at the end of the night deck is like barely mid tier. What the hell are you guys playing? But yeah,
Yeah.
it's I learned a lot that year.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, on the stream game with you and Sheldon playing against Ryan
Mm.
and Cryptic, you actually won. And it was a pretty decisive victory as well, if I remember
It
correctly.
it it did. I did win, but that's also because the other three guys took each other out. And it was, I mean, it was a really cool game though. I love that deck. It's hard to play a -1/-1 counter deck on camera though. I've learned that it's hard because you can't just put tokens on other people's screens. But we were talking earlier today, even in the Discord channel, about like getting together with games and having discussions about what it means to have power level. Like when you don't have something like a pre-DH, the play DH scale handy, and someone to judge your deck and say like you are in this box and that box. What do you where do we go from here? How do we sit down and talk to each other?
Well, I mean, obviously our decks are both sevens, so I think we'll be fine if we just play together. No, like I got to be honest with you, I despise numerical power levels. That doesn't mean anything at all because nobody can agree on what it means.
Well, the whole point of a everybody's like, have you guys figured out a way to do numerical power scales? And honestly, I spent like 2 years studying different ways to sort out and power level structure and build a hierarchy for EDH. And it is my conclusion after literally that was my project as a member of the CAG was trying to figure this out. My conclusion is that it is not possible because the fact that there is no agreeable baseline. There's no flat thing that we can point to and say, this is a 5, or this is like the dead middle of what it means to be power. There are 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 cards in Magic. People use them in utterly bizarre and weird ways. And 2 cards in combination, like any card individually, okay, yeah, Jeweled Lotus is obviously going to be a sign that this card is busted. But what makes things powerful in Commander is not one card. It is that card in conjunction with like other cards that build up the deck. And you have to then start grading packages. You then have to start grading concepts and ideas, and like random obscure card that is total trash in every deck ever imagined from like, Prophecy or whatever could be the home run winning card that just makes this combo into an unbeatable, unlimited, like infinite because it's with this other card that was printed 20 years later. How do we grade those? How do we sit and like we could grade by commander, but then that's also not really a useful scale because like um my take on like a Brea deck versus say if you gave Brea to like I don't know Reed Duke or Siggy or like Josh Lee Kwai, what are the decks going to look like at the end of the day? They're not going to be the same. My Brea deck is going to be all weird like Kaladesh draft commons that make Thopters, and their decks are going to be like combo trains, right? Like what does it look like? I mean, if I played a Krakashima deck versus the cEDH Krakashima deck, one is going to be a 3 and one is going to be an 11. Right? It's like,
Yeah, it's interesting that you said that because a common question that we get from people when they first join our server is what's the power level of this commander? And it's like, I can't answer that question because I don't know, maybe your Urza deck has like only artifacts in it that cost 10 mana or something. I
like
don't know what it is.
if I build an Urza deck where the entire gimmick is using things like all the Urza gear from Antiquities and Revised, it is not going to be very good Urza deck, right? Like, but it's so hard. And everybody's like, oh yeah, my deck's a 7. What the hell does that mean? It's a 7 in relation to the people you play with. You guys are all kind of the average-ish. But when you're sitting down at a store, how do you sit and like where do we go? Where do we find a conversation where we can sit there and say like, yo, this deck and my deck are not going to play well together?
Yeah, so like I used to be really bad at this. And like when I first started playing Commander, I borrowed some decks from people at my college campus, and they were like, "Hey, you got to play Commander with us." And I was like, "Oh, I don't never played this format. I always thought it was goofy, and I never played it. And I was playing Modern, and they were like, "Come on, just try it, and you'll think that it's fun." And I borrowed Veerdaloth the Ancient from Invasion,
Mm,
that green tree folk that makes saprolings. And I
love
won the game, and I was like, you know what? That was actually kind of fun. So we played
that.
another game, and I borrowed Kalemne, Disciple of Iroas, the Boros experience counters giant.
The
And
weird
these
one that like
decks
cares
were
about
like
like 5 power.
absolutely terrible decks. And it's like, these are like worse than a precon, like the decks that I was playing. And I was like, that was pretty fun. But they were like, yeah, those are our weakest decks. We actually usually play like stronger decks, but we didn't want you to have to like learn what all these cards do. And I was like, well, I've been playing Magic since 1995,
I
so
can
I could
figure it out.
probably figure out what some of these other cards do. So they were like, well, why don't you make your own deck? So I went home and I was like, well, what could I do here? Yeah, so I went home and I was like, well, what could I do here? And I I was like, oh, I could make uh, like an angel deck or something because I had all these angels and stuff.
Mm.
And then I was like, wait, I also have all these like Armageddons and stuff. And I was like, well, I like Armageddon and I think it's a good
Oh
card.
no.
And like I had Avacyn Angel of Hope, so I said, well, I could make an Avacyn deck and then I could like cast Armageddon and it would be one sided, you know?
It sure
And
would.
that would be powerful. And I think it would be pretty fun. And oh, what's this equipment I found from Mirrodin? It's called World Slayer. Yeah,
Oh
that
my
looks
god.
pretty good in here. So I put this deck together, and it had like these hate bears and like some angels and like these mass land destruction and board wipes and stuff. And I went and I played with my friends, and it was like on par with what they were playing. You know, they were playing some pretty powerful decks, and I was like, okay, yeah, this is a pretty fun format. I'll keep playing it. Then I went to a local game store. And I go in the game store and I'm like, yeah, my commander's Avacyn. And they're like, oh, are you playing angels? And I said, well, there's some angels in here, you know, and they didn't ask me anything about the deck, you know, and we're playing. And I had my commander out. She had lightning greaves on. And like, well, I had mana open. So I said, all right, well, I drew this card. So I'm going to cast Armageddon. And this guy was like, are you serious? You're going to cast Armageddon in a commander game? And I was like, yeah, it's not on the ban list, right? And he was like, and he went and he talked to the owner of the store, and he was like trying to get them to like tell me I had to leave. And I was like, I don't get this. What am I dealing with here? You know, like I'm following the ban list. I'm just playing something that's pretty powerful, but like my commander cost 8 mana. And remember, this is before like the Jeweled Lotus era when commander mana values were
Yeah,
suggested.
and in the era when white had literally nothing in the way of ramp except for tithe and land tax.
Yeah, I didn't
And
even have Smothering Tithe back then. It was
no,
2018.
like I mean old tithe. The
Oh,
instant
Tithe,
that, like,
yeah. They'll search your library for
search
some
for
lands and
planes.
put them in your hand. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's good. So, like, I actually had that in my deck back then to show you how much we were struggling. Though I still play that in some decks right now.
It's a good
It's a
card.
cool card, and I love the art on it. Um, so I was like, I don't get it. And the game store guy doesn't play Commander. And he was like, well, if it's not banned and he's not breaking the rules, you know, you're just going to have to deal with it. But I was like, I don't get this. You know, like what's going on? So like I went online and I started reading more about this format because this is the first time I had ever played this format with strangers. I had been playing it for like a month with my friends, and nobody ever said anything to me about anything. So I went online and I started reading things about Commander, and I saw that, you know, some posts and things online like the old Commander Rules Committee forums and stuff like that from that era when you could still read those classics, and like MTG Salvation and stuff. And I was like, Commander is a social format and like it's about the experience. And, you know, I didn't know any of this. Nobody told me anything about it, you know? So I was like, oh, okay, so like maybe someone won't want to play against this, but maybe they will. So all I have to do is say, hey, this is what I'm playing. And, you know, if you don't want to play against this, I can maybe play something else. Or, you know, you can play with a different person if this is the only deck that I have. Because it quickly became apparent to me that, like, if you're not going to enjoy playing the game, then it's probably easier to just walk away and say, I'll play with someone else. You know,
There's a famous saying from the Commander Rules Committee, which I think it's from Toby Elliott, which is that not playing Magic is better than playing bad Magic.
yeah, and I got to agree with that completely. I will say that I don't agree with everything that the Rules Committee or individual members of the Rules Committee or the Commander Advisory Group says, and I don't think there's anybody that agrees with everything everybody says.
We don't agree with
different
everything we
people
say.
on the Rules Committee and the Commander Advisory Group, or else there really only need to be one person. So, you know, but I like that particular expression. So, like for me, then I started to play games with people, and I would say, hey, this is my Avacyn deck. It's the only deck that I have right now. I just started playing. It has Armageddon and these other cards in it. So if you don't want to play against that, then, you know, maybe we'll just play with other people, and that's fine. You know, and people would say, yeah, I'll play against it. And then they would have a better reaction if I did do it. You know, but then there were people who were like, well, I don't want to play against that. And it's like, yeah, that's fine too. I'd rather that everybody knows what they're getting into. It's not about gotchas for me.
I agree completely.
So like that was my first introduction to like the rule zero and like pre-game conversations. And I was like, yeah, that does make Commander a lot more fun. And I was still playing modern and stuff. And, over time I stopped playing those other formats. And like I pretty much just play like limited and Commander now. So um I started to see like online when you read things, people are like, well, my deck is a 7 power level or an 8 power level or a 5. And it's like, yeah, but what does that actually mean? You know? And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, I don't know what that is. And then I'm looking at these deck lists and I'm like, this deck list that this person says is a 5, and this deck list that this person says is an 8. The 5 looks better than the 8 to me. Like, there's no way that this is a worse deck than that. So it's like that doesn't make any sense. So then I was like, well, that doesn't work. It's easier to just tell people like this is what your deck does. It does it about this fast. This is the type of strategy I have. you know so like that's
Mm-hmm.
what I was doing. And then I started to play online. Like when the pandemic started, I was looking online for places to play, and I found this place called the PlayEDH Discord server. And I was like, what is this? And I went in there and I was like, I had never used Discord before. And I went in there and they were like, hey, get your deck checked and we'll tell you what power level it is. And so I put my deck in and they were like, this is a mid power deck. And I was like, okay, I'll go play mid power with people. And I went and I played, and people would get annoyed at you if you blew up lands or whatever. But, I would just tell people this is what I'm playing. So, that it's possible. And they had like a system which has gotten a little bit more robust in its explanations since then to help categorize decks. And I was like, wow, this is a really good way to like get an understanding of how strong your deck is. And it's like, yeah, full disclosure, I did not think, and I still do not think, that the PlayEDH curated power level system is perfect. There are decks that just don't conform to the way that it works. And people will always disagree with things. It's their entitlement to do so. A lot of other places have emulated what we did. You've probably seen it elsewhere.
Mm.
And like people either like it or they don't like it. It's totally fine if they don't. It doesn't have to be for everybody. It does make it easy to find like a relatively balanced pickup game.
Yeah.
And yeah, you might occasionally run into a deck that you just don't like, or maybe a deck that just feels like it was more powerful than the other decks because maybe their hand opener was really good or something like that. It's not a perfect system. And obviously, there's a little bit of a range in each power level because otherwise we would have about 5,000 power levels.
How granular do you want to get? Like, one of the things is like, I think one of the things you've touched on here is that it's hard to codify this notion of the social contract. Like, you can't really put a ban. I mean, we could ban Armageddon, but then it's like, how many land destruction things do we want to ban? Do we want to just rip the entire package out, or do we just say like, hey guys, Commander players like to cast their spells, and Armageddon makes some people happy. Some people, they like to play around the puzzle of that. Uh, it's great. You just need to make sure that communication is the key, right? Like, um, ultimately speaking, it's like mass land destruction is so weird because like we live in a world of treasures now, and the more I think about it, the more I'm like, maybe we should be playing more Armageddons and stuff because you guys have so many infinite ways to play mana. But that's like a discussion that somebody needs to have. That's not me. As the turbo terrible ramper here. But one of the like the value of rule zero to me is in making sure that when you sit down to a table, you and the other people at the table are all on the same page of the experience you're trying to have, right? And like, I am very happy to tell people, I'm like, yo, this is the deck I'm running. Like, this is my Nethroi deck. It's a reanimator deck, but it's also mainly trying to be a mutate deck. I'm just trying to kind of Voltron out and just make a bunch of cool stuff and win. And I'm happy to tell them that, and they're happy to say like, oh, hang on, let me grab my deck that's got like graveyard hate or something. I'm like, okay, that's fine, whatever. But I don't think we need to tell people like infinite details about our deck unless we're hitting some taboo topics. It's like, if I've got a very high level deck, and if I've got a deck that's like leaning towards like board control, staxy type things, maybe it's important to have that discussion beforehand, because some people, like, there's a cliche that EDH players want to play solitaire against each other, right? Like, we all want to sit there, we all want to build our Mega Johnny engines and pop off and then compare boards at the end of the day. That is a cliche born out of truth to some extent, because I know, for instance, I really like building Rube Goldberg machines. I get really grumpy when people mess with my table. However, I say that as that's grump born of salt, not grump born of I need to change the format, right? Like, of course, a counter spell is going to make me salty. That's just magic. Like, find a person in any format ever who hasn't cast a spell, who hasn't been like, God damn it, you forced me. That sucks. Especially now that there's like 300 free counter spells. Stop doing that, Watsy. But like, playing a control deck, playing a Armageddon deck, playing like a Staxy type deck, I think these are like, it's just going to be better for everybody if you guys just sit and say like, hey, is this something we're cool with? Because if not, then you don't want people getting grumpy at you later. Or the person on the other side of the table is like, okay, you know what? I will mentally readjust myself to accept that my shit's going to accept that my stuff's going to get countered. And then you deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, like, my strongest deck is Heliod Suncrowned, and it's a cEDH deck, and it's a combo deck with the commander and one card, and it's also a Stax deck that's designed to make it harder for my opponents to play while I get to my combo.
That's
so
the
like
one
it's
that works with Walking Ballista, right?
Yeah, so like you can combo with Walking Ballista or Triskelion in the deck as the main win conditions, but like it's playing a bunch of stuff like Rule of Law, Archon of Emeria, Trinosphere, Dranith Magistrate, a bunch of cards that the average commander player isn't going to enjoy playing against, but it's a cEDH deck. So like I wouldn't play that deck against like random people that are just looking to play a commander game, because that's not what I built that deck for, and it's just not designed for that type of environment, and it's not going to make for a good game. And to be entirely honest, a lot of Stax effects that are good in cEDH aren't very good in casual EDH either. It's like, oh, I cast one huge dinosaur every turn. Well, my card that says each player can only cast one spell every turn isn't really doing anything in this job.
Yeah, let me tell you, dude, someone tried to play that card against me once, and I'm like, if you think I'm not tapping out with my mana every turn to play one thing at a time, I don't know what you think I'm doing.
Yeah, and it's like it's funny, and it's like Trinosphere. It's like, well, all my creatures are like 5 mana or more, so
Yeah,
I
it's
don't
like,
care
oh,
if
no.
a spell that costs 3 mana or that a spell has to cost at least 3 mana. It's like I don't care. It's like, yeah, it's so like knowing what. But like then I have like my Avacyn deck. It runs like it does have Dranith Magistrate, and Dranith Magistrate's strong anywhere you play it. Like stopping people from playing their commander or cascading or doing who knows what else, casting spells from the graveyard. Like it kind of just does everything. But like just stopping your commander is strong enough for 2 mana. But like I don't play Dranith Magistrate in every deck that I play. I play it in decks that I think are at a power level where it's strong enough that you would say Dranith Magistrate is a reasonable card in this table, because my opponents are playing Corvold, Chulane, and Kinnan, and all of those commanders are like warping the game just by being on the battlefield.
I think like because I hear a lot of people are like, oh man, you got to ban Dranith Magistrate. It like totally stops us from playing commander. I'm like, Dranith Magistrate has found it is this type of card that has found the table it is perfect at. It is really, really good at a highly interactive cEDH or top tier table where it just makes a roadblock that you have to deal with. But that format is built around roadblocks and trying to deal with them. That's the whole point of playing high power Magic, is like you're trying to counter each other. You're trying to do a lot of the mental play and stuff. It doesn't really show up in lower tier play, because a lot of people look at that and they're like, it dies to any wrath or removal. And also just like it irritates my friend, so I'm just not going to put it in the deck. Right. Like it's a much safer and properly positioned cEDH card that I'm totally okay with just existing.
Yeah, it's like I have a Dranith Magistrate and my opponents are swinging their 5/5s and 6/6s at me every turn until I die, because I won't just block with my Dranith Magistrate to avoid dying. And it's like, yeah, that's kind of a problem you made for yourself. I'm playing it in that type of table, where I definitely think it's really, really good in like a higher power level. I think it's going to cause problems for you a lot of the time in a lower power table, where there's just going to be a lot more creatures to turn sideways. Games are a lot longer. It will eventually die, like,
Yeah.
and it's a roadblock. I wouldn't say you can't play Dranith Magistrate in a lower power level. I think it's just you're going to assume a lot of risks by deciding to cast that spell.
Yeah, you're going to make yourself the target, and then you're going to sit here with your little tutu, and everybody's just going to come at you until you die so that they can start playing their stuff again.
Yeah, and so like I think Dranith Magistrate's really strong. The text written on it is extremely powerful. Although ironically, I think it was designed to stop companions from being cast, and it doesn't do that now. Which it is what it is. Um, so like for me, knowing what's an appropriate card to play and what's not, like I just made like a humans deck at the beginning of the year. I make like only a few decks a year that I actually wind up playing. So I made a humans deck, and it has a Michiko Kanda Truth Seeker in it. Okay, and Michiko Kanda says, whenever a source deals damage to you, that source's controller sacrifices a permanent. And it's like, okay, well, under normal circumstances, if you swing a creature at me, I know that you have a creature that you can sacrifice because it just hit me, you know. But if you're not being careful and you play like a pestilence or something, and then my Michiko Kanda is indestructible or whatever, and you activate pestilence a whole bunch of times, you're probably going to sacrifice all your lands. But that's going to be like a problem you made for yourself, because you're the one who decided that that's what you needed to do while Michiko Kanda was on the board. Where like, if I cast Dranith Magistrate, it's always going to stop you from casting your commander, and you're always going to be mad at me about it.
Right. Man, Michiko Kanda is a mean card, though. What a card.
Yeah, no, it's like that white occasionally gets like this card that it's got a lot of cards that I think are rude. I think white is the rudest color in the game.
Oh, it is 100% the rudest color.
White is absolutely the rudest color in the game. It's like, you can't do this, or whenever you do this, this horrible thing happens to you, or like, hey, I hope you didn't need those lands, or hey, where'd all your creatures, enchantments, artifacts, and graveyard go because I cast an all modes farewell, like, hey, hope you weren't planning on using any of those things. And I gotta be honest with you, I hate when people cast farewell on all modes.
It's so pointless.
Except if you have something like Teferi's Protection or Clever Concealment, where it's like, well, I have like 30 power on board. I'm going to farewell you guys, and I'm going to resolve my Teferi's Protection, and then, hey, I know that I'm going to be able to kill you guys. But like, when you all modes farewell, and then it's like, well, we're all playing a land and casting one spell for the next 2 hours, because
it's like upheaval all over again.
It's like, at least your lands stick around, but it's like, this is so rough to play against. And like, I say this as someone who has farewell in multiple decks, but I try not to cast farewell unless I'm going to do, like, I'm going to say, well, I'm going to cast Clever Concealment and phase out all my non-land permanents, and then I still have all my stuff, so I know that I'm still going to have a lot to do, and it was just my way of getting ahead of you guys. It's kind of like, I cast the Cyclonic Rift when I have 1/1/1 on the board, and then none of us do anything, and we're just rebuilding for the next 10 turns or whatever. It's the same thing, except I guess the cards don't go back to your hand. But it's the same kind of thing where people hate when you do that. And it's like, I can relate to that too, even though I play this card. But I always try to be like the smart farewell player, or like, maybe my opponents are playing, one of them is playing an Enchantress deck and the other one's playing an Artifact deck, and I have 15 creatures on the board. I'll just exile enchantments and artifacts, and then my creatures are still here. Just because you can choose all the modes on farewell, that doesn't mean you have to choose all the modes on Farewell, right?
Choosing all the modes on Farewell is exactly what you said. Like, people are like, well, if you hate Farewell, why don't you hate Cyclonic Rift? It's worse. I'm like, A, Cyclonic Rift costs more. B, Cyclonic Rift is, at least if you're playing it right, leave somebody with something to win the game with. If you're like, a Cyclonic Rift onto an empty board is stupid and I hate that. Like, but if you're doing a Cyclonic Rift where you've got the ability to attack and come back and slam people, fine, you won the game. Game's over. Great. But Farewell is just such a board reset, especially if you just all modes it. It's so dumb. And even if you don't all modes it, it's so, like, the fact that it can like exile graveyards and like whatever else you're on the table, you're just like completely destroying the entire game plan of whoever is on the table, and they might as well just scoop and start over. I don't know. Like, I love a Merciless Eviction. It's one of my favorite like wraths in the game, but that's a choose one. If Farewell was like choose two, do two of these things, I would love it. I think it would be sick. But choose one or more is just egregious. But like, you know what? Whatever. It's like, it's not a bannable card. It's a dumb card. I just want to encourage people not to play it just because it's not very sporting.
Yeah, and like for me, I don't hate the card, but I don't like the card either because of the play pattern that I see when other people cast it. And it's like, I try not to be the person who does that. It's kind of like, oh, it's turn 4 and I have Armageddon in my hand so I can cast it because I have 4 mana. It's like, why would I do that? It's like, but we're going to say probably everyone who doesn't like Armageddon in Commander had that type of experience with it, right? Where somebody cast it just because they could, rather than, hey, I built up this domineering board presence where I know that I'm on top of this and I'm going to close the game out, but I want to make sure that it's harder for my opponents to catch back up with me. And like, that's a good Armageddon where like, I cast Armageddon on turn 4 because I drew the card is a bad Armageddon, you know,
Yes.
and
Yes.
you're always entitled to not want to play against Armageddon if you don't want to. You know, I don't always want to play against Armageddon either. But, you know, I do like casting the spell occasionally, which is why I run 2 copies of it in my deck because Ravages of War is the exact same.
Oh, I was going to say, I'm like, wait a sec. My one problem with Armageddon is that they put some of the best art in the game on all of the different versions of Armageddon. And it's just like, it's not a card that's playable in formats I like to play and in styles I want to play in. But like, my one experience with Armageddon, not my one, but one of my experiences, early experiences in Commander with Armageddon, I was playing against a dude who had a deck that ran Elspeth, and he got Elspeth up to her ultimate that made everything indestructible, and then he cast the Armageddon. And I was like, okay, well, this sucks and I hate it, but also at least you had a win. At least you had a way to win, and the game ended. But that definitely did not make Armageddon my favorite card in Commander.
So my question is, which Armageddon artwork do you like the most?
Oh, goodness gracious. Like, I think Portal. Uh, let's see. First off, there was the M25 one, which was by Chris Ron with the awesome like red sunset over this like horrifying kind of like cloud formation. That looks sick. I love the one from the original Portal. That's just the sun over like the cracked landscape. That one I think is definitely my favorite. The original Armageddon is just horrifying when you actually look at it. It's like a post-nuclear disaster. The Portal Second Age one is cool. It's got the dusty clouds and stuff. It feels like the Eldrazi came through it. But also there, I think, and then like last one would be like the one that was for what the hell was it? The bonus cards from Amonkhet, the masterpieces or whatever, Invocations. The Invocations one with like Bolus's thing in the corner, that's cool. It's story and thematic. But I think for me, the Portal one with just the sun blasted land is just the sickest art.
Yeah, I love the Portal version of the card. It is my favorite version of the card for sure, with that awesome John Avon artwork. It's an incredible artwork. And I love like those old Magic cards with like the literary quotes on them. And it's got the quote from Paradise Lost on it. And it's like, that is such a perfect looking card. But by comparison, Portal's Wrath of God has horrible artwork. Like, and the rules text on the card is so bad because like it doesn't actually tell you what the card does because portal cards have like
Oh
terrible
yeah,
rules text.
Portal's Wrath
Like
of God, which has got
put
the weird.
all creatures into their owner's discard piles, and it's like, what does that even mean? you know, and
From
it's like,
where? From like the. Yeah, it's like you. I don't know why they couldn't just say that destroy all creatures. Like it's okay to just say destroy all
yeah,
creatures. You've got cards,
the other one says destroy all lands on it, so it's the same set. But
and there's a card in this set called Vengeance, which is destroy any one tapped creature. So you know what destroy a creature means.
yeah,
Put all creatures in the pile.
I don't know. I don't get it. It's so weird. Portal did like one thing that I like, and then like so many things that I don't like.
I still kind of wish we had the sword and shield symbols for the power and toughness. I thought that was really just sick looking.
Yeah, that's that one thing that I like. The sword and shield for power and toughness is so cool because you know exactly what it means when you look at it.
Yeah, it's
But
such
like
a good tool.
everything else about the way Portal was designed, it's wild. Also, can we talk about how from 1993 to 1999, Armageddon was in every single starter level Magic product ever?
Yeah, it's like, Dark Ritual and Hippie are too much, but Armageddon's fine.
Yeah, it's like literally true. You can literally go online, and from 1993 to 1999, it was in every single starter level
It
product
was just
that they
always
made.
legal.
And it's like, that is a wild thing to think about.
The
That
cards.
Armageddon was perfectly okay for that. And it's like, I don't know. I love Armageddon. I've always been like super impressed by like, well, if I cast this, I'm making a serious decision about the future of my time playing because there was no way to make lands indestructible back then. That didn't exist. You couldn't do anything like that back then.
Well, there was Equinox. Equinox, which I used to run, it was an enchantment from Legends that I used to run because I was in an Armageddon heavy meta in middle school. And Equinox is an enchantment that says enchant land and tap land enchanted with Equinox to counter a spell that destroys one or more of your lands. This village
Yeah,
pledge is interrupted.
that
So
card
yeah,
is a rules disaster because it actually has to look forward at what the result of the spell would be and determine whether or not it's accurate in order to counter the spell. So, like, if it tries to destroy an indestructible land, it doesn't counter the spell. It's an absolutely wild card. I have a friend who's a level 3 judge and he collects Equinox because of how crazy the rules are for it. It's such a weird card. And the art's really interesting. It's not a very good card. But yeah, like back then, if you cast Armageddon, your lands were getting destroyed too. Where like nowadays, it's like, well, I could cast Armageddon and my land's getting destroyed as a suggestion because I could cast Heroic Intervention or something, or
or
have
phase
Adversary,
out, or yeah, exactly,
and
whatever.
it's like Boros Charm. And also, can we talk about this for a second? Did you know that the white half of Boros Charm is permanents you control become indestructible? There is not a single white card that's like a sorcery or an instant that does that. Did you know that?
There are plenty of cards that make individual creatures indestructible, and
Yeah,
I'm
but
pretty
not that
sure.
make lands indestructible.
Hmm.
I wonder why. Do you think they did it on purpose?
Why they make it so that land can't be indestructible?
In
Uh,
white, like, do you think they thought people would play it with Armageddon? I've always thought that was an
I
interesting.
think they realized because Elspeth Knight Errant came out before that, and so Elspeth Knight Errant came out in Shard of Alara, and then I think they looked and they're like, oh, people are playing Elspeth Geddon, and that's not fun, and we don't want to encourage that,
Yeah,
but it makes sense here.
that's
I don't know
okay.
why that says permanent.
A
Hmm.
couple years ago, they said mass land destruction isn't in White's color pie anymore, so we're all safe now. They can print it now. Yeah, so like it's interesting to me. Like you can have like a really bad experience with a card, and it can come down to that card just not being fun, or it can come down to like someone just not playing it in a way that's conducive to the game, like continuing in a way that's
Hmm.
either the game will never end or like the game just isn't fun anymore. Like it's the reason why Shahrazad is banned. It's like nobody wants to play against that because it will never be fun.
Oh man, fun is such a hard concept to like educate. Like, what does it mean to be fun?
Yeah, it's tough because it's like I don't think that there's any individual definition of what's fun, which is why I think like when you sit down with someone, asking them like, what kind of game do you want to play? Do you want to see these types of cards? Are you okay with this strategy that I use that I know some people don't like because I got yelled at for trying to cast this spell this one time? Like, are these things all okay with you? And then what are you playing? Does it feel like we're going to have a good game together? Like, and then, after a game's over, if it seems like somebody didn't get to do a lot or they didn't have fun, asking them what could have happened that would have made it better for them, like you can have that conversation too. And like, yeah, you can't always have that conversation because maybe this person has a really bad game and they get salty and they die first and they leave and you don't have time to talk to them, or they just don't want to talk to you, like, but you can always try to do better and, have a better experience with people and play like you want to play with that person again.
Yes, yes, yes. One of the things that Rules Committee member Olivia Gilbert Hicks likes to say so much is that Rule Zero is for game two. It's game one. You can't really control a lot of what people are doing. People are going to play what they're going to play. You can have a discussion, but it's always going to come down to, oh yeah, my deck's a 7. But game two, you can sit there and say like, hey, you know what? I didn't really enjoy that kind of deck. Do you have any other kinds of decks you have that we can play? And you can start to kind of customize and shape your games as you go forward. Yes, it's easier to do with persistent groups and less easy to do with groups in stores. That's kind of why the ban list exists, but the ban list isn't perfect. That's why Rule Zero also has to exist. But like I'm so glad cEDH exists as a term that we can point to now, because then we've got another just fixed like locus that we can say, oh, this is a cEDH deck. Okay, well, I don't want to play cEDH, and then we can have a kind of at least some sort of sorting. But it's really incumbent on us in a social format to be social and to actually sit there and talk to people and sit there and say like, hey, you know what can we do? How can we make this more fun for all of us? But
Yeah,
people get
I
grumpy.
agree. Like,
People get grumpy
definitely.
when I say like, you know what, we're responsible for everybody else's happiness, but I believe it.
Yeah, like I think that people should take responsibility for trying to make sure that they have fun during a commander game. But I think that you should also try to take some responsibility for trying to make sure that we're upfront about what kind of game it's going to be and make sure that everybody knows and understands that. Like, obviously, there's exceptions. Like, if we're playing cEDH and we're in a cEDH tournament, Shivam, I'm not going to say, are you okay with me casting my Archon of Emeria on turn one against your 5-color storm deck? Like, I'm not going to ask you that. I'm just going to do it.
Well, no, because
But
the understanding we're here we already have that pregame understanding of like, you're going to try to stop me from doing the thing. I'm going to try to stop you from doing the thing. Like,
yeah, so like there's always like gray areas like that. And I think the existence of cEDH, and I'm a cEDH player as well, is a very healthy thing to have. And like, different people have different perceptions about like what a card is and when a card is appropriate and what it represents and like things like that. So like it's not always like as simple as, like this one card or whatever it is. Do you remember the first time that you and I interacted with each other?
No, remind me.
Okay, so I posted a deck list in the rules committee server, and you'll probably remember once I tell you this. I posted my Avacyn Angel of Hope deck, and at the time it had a curse totem in it. Okay. And so I posted it, and people were looking at it, and you came and you looked at it and you said, oh, this must be a cEDH deck because it has a curse totem in it. And I said, this is not a cEDH deck. There is no way that this is a cEDH
Early
deck.
on, before I understood really the nuance of what cEDH is, I used Curse Totem as my rubric for like, if you're running Curse Totem, a Curse Totem is an artifact which basically says, creatures can't use their abilities or something to that effect. And I was like, if you are putting Curse Totem in your deck, that means you're playing at you're trying to stop people from having fun or play. So obviously you must be playing at cEDH because they don't know how to fun. Right. And of course, the more nuance I got, the better I got at understanding what cEDH is later. I changed that rubric. But there was a time there where Curse Totem was just like my biggest number one hated card because I'm like, what the hell, man? What do you mean I can't tap my Lawnmower Elves? So stupid.
Yeah, and it's like I like Curse Totem because I can play like a bunch of big like fair angel cards or whatever, and then like my opponent that's trying to like do some crazy tap on tap thing with their creatures and make like ridiculous amounts of mana and like sink it all into Thrasios with their Seedborn Muse, has to play fair magic with me. And it's like, so for me, Curse Totem is funny because it's like such a spiky card when you read it, but then it's
Mhm.
like such a teamy card when you think about the way that you can apply, like how you can play it. So, like, are you familiar with the Commander sub format? It's like a fan made format. It's called Conquest. Have you heard of it?
Yes.
Okay, so Conquest has like a different ban list and some different rules, like the commander damage threshold is lower. Every reserve list card is banned. Cards that have created problems for balance. It's designed to be like a fairly balanced format, and it's designed to like open up avenues for different strategies to be viable, including like just playing a straight up aggro deck, so like aggro decks can compete with combo, and that's not really something that you can do in like a higher level commander game. Like the combo deck will always beat the aggro deck.
Mm.
So in Conquest, there's like an entire archetype where like you just play like fair creatures that just do like a thing like Adeline, Resplendent Cathar that are just
Mm.
big and don't have activated abilities. But you can play Curse Totem in your deck because it stops all these decks that are trying to do this quotation marks unfair strategy and do these combo things because you don't care about it. So like that's like a super teamy kind of thing when you think about it. It's like, well, I'm going to play this deck and we're going to play the way I want to play, which is the teamy way where we put these creatures out and turn them sideways. And it's like the funniest thing about like Stax pieces and hate bears is in like a higher power environment, they turn the game into like this weird like version of like, so I play Heliod and like you play like a rule of law and like Trinosphere and stuff, and then it's like, oh, I cast my Crom and I start swinging around at people, and that's all I'm able to do, and I can't cast any storm spells, and my Underworld Breach is bad, so like I this is how we're playing right now till we remove this, and it's like that is the most teamy game of cEDH that you will ever see in your entire life.
A bunch of
And
docksides
it's
swinging at
so
each other.
funny because it's so different from how you expect cEDH to play
It's
out. So
cEDH as
like
Richard Garfield intended.
I love playing like hate bears and Stax pieces because I like the way they flip the game into a different like kind of game. And like some people might not like to play against that and that's their entitlement, but like when you're playing these games like you get these funny experiences. I have Paladin class in my cEDH deck
I love
because the
that card.
level 1 thing on Paladin class says spells your opponents cast during your turn cost 1 generic more to cast, and people never remember that it's out, so like they're like, well, I have a Force of Will in my hand. Oh, you're going to try and combo, I cast my Force of Will. And it's like, that's nice. Do you have any mana for that? No. Okay. Then I guess you don't cast Force of Will during my turn. But like you can go, okay, we're in this like super grindy game. I'm going to level my Paladin class up in this cEDH game. And like people never have a blocker. Like they just don't have one because they don't think about it. It's like, well, it's turn 7 and there's been all these Stax pieces on the board and somebody tried to win and they failed and there's no blocker on that side of the board. And I don't want that person to be able to try to win on their turn because I think maybe they will. My commander's on board. I'm going to level my Paladin class up to level 3 and I'm going to swing my commander at you and these couple other creatures, and my commander is going to get this buff and it's going to deal 21 commander damage to you and kill you in combat. And they're just like, what? It's like, yeah, that just happened. And it's so funny. And it's like, I'm not going to pretend that Paladin class is like a godly tier 1 cEDH staple, but it's definitely one of my favorite cards to have on my board in cEDH for moments like that. You know, and no matter what power level I play, I like to win. Like I have fun when I win, but I still want to also have fun with my cards. you know?
Yes, yes, I do. Like I realize, like I mean, winning for me is secondary. Obviously, I enjoy winning. I certainly my decks play like they want to win, but it's like that's not the point I'm here for. I want to see the cool, flashy things happen. But if you like Paladin class me to death like that, I would like applaud because that would just be so funny. Like that's the kind of win that I love. And Paladin
So
class is such a good card. God, I love that card.
I was lucky enough to play with Sheldon during the Alliance of Military Magic Players military magic marathon. They invited me on as a guest,
Mm,
which was really honored for me because I'm not a service member. I've never served, but I had like worked with their community, like get some word out for them. So they invited me in and it was a huge honor. That would be Greg Sablon's
yes.
Discord that he started from the Commander Advisor Group. So Sheldon and I were in a game and I played against Sheldon and I was playing an Adeline Resplendent Cathar
I love that card
deck,
too.
and he was playing the You Did It to Yourself deck, which I wouldn't have wanted him to play anything else in this game. So he got like 4 or 5 like big gotcha moments in this game with different cards, and then like nobody expected it, and it did like this crazy thing, and then it was just me and him on the table, and I was like, oh my god. And he's got mana untapped, and I was like, oh geez. And so I had Paladin class on the board, and he had 4 mana, uh, and he goes to cast. I don't remember what it was. It was some 4 mana spell, and I was like, "I'm sorry, Sheldon, but you did it to yourself this time because you didn't leave mana open for my Paladin class."
Yes, get it.
And he was like, you know what? I got to accept that it was my mistake, you know? And so people would be like, oh, well, Sheldon bans these cards that he doesn't like and he bans these cards that he loses to. And it's like, I watched Sheldon lose to a Paladin class and it didn't get banned. So I don't believe that story for a second. I've never heard him say anything bad about Paladin class in my life. In fact, he seemed to have a great time during that game. So, like, I always thought that was like super disrespectful. And, like Sheldon was a fantastic person. He was always super encouraging of us and what we were doing at PlayEDH. Like he reached out to us. He came to some of our meetings just to talk to us, like
Mm,
our staff meetings stuff. Fantastic guy. Like I just never thought that was fair. But like my experience, like that was a great story that I will always be able to tell for the rest of my life, which I think is exactly what Sheldon would have wanted.
yes. Yep. Oh man, Shelton was like a people give him a lot of crap or gave him a lot of crap, and I don't think a lot of it was deserved. I mean, some of it was, some of it definitely he was a little bit like a cranky old goat at times, but like I have nothing but gratitude for what he brought to the game and to me personally. And plus, playing that game on the Play EDH server with him is still one of the most memorable games I ever played in my life because, it was um, somebody for like player one casts or like Wrath of God or some like kind of board wipey type thing. Player two had a foretold card that let him like blink all of his creatures. Sheldon, in response, Reigns of Powers to switch creatures so that all of his creatures get blinked out, and then player two's creatures get wrathed off, and then they come back and Sheldon's got a full board again. And I'm like, that is the greatest play I've ever seen in my life. That is the
Yeah.
most BS play I've ever seen.
So I actually know exactly what that was. Cryptic, our admin, who's like the leader of our team,
Mm.
played a cosmic intervention in response to a board wipe, and he got by Sheldon's Reigns of Power big time.
Yes.
It was like the highlight of that whole
It
stream.
was it's
It was
one of my
so
favorite
fun.
stories I've ever had. It's so
I
good.
loved it. That was like the most Sheldon thing that I've ever seen. Like that was like the most Sheldon that Sheldon ever Sheldon.
Yes.
It
Right. And
was
like
so good.
Reigns of Power is such a classic old time, people have forgotten this card exists commander card that did like just come and like ruin lives with that was so choice. It was such a good move. Um, my fidget today has been my little metal slime paperweight, which I know
Oh,
you and I both, the Dragon Quest fans, good times. But man, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a really good conversation. It was really interesting. It didn't go where I expected to go, but your conversation with me never do, and it's always fun.
Well, I certainly appreciate you having me on. Yeah, I mean, I just want to throw it out there real quick since you mentioned Dragon Quest. We heard about Dragon Quest 12 like 3 years ago, and they showed us the logo, and then we've never heard anything since then. So hopefully 2024 is the year where we finally hear about this game that I've been waiting to hear about anything about.
I'm just saying that 3 years ago there was some stuff going on that made game development a little harder. And
Oh,
Square Enix
absolutely.
is just
I
Square
just
Enix. Mm.
it's hard to be excited about games nowadays if you mostly like older games. Like there are exceptions. Like I'm playing Nier Automata for the first time ever, and that's a pretty fun game. Although I'm still not really sure why the protagonist's butt is visible, like literally at all times.
Because
But
the creator
you
is
know,
a troll who loves that sort of thing.
yeah, there's nothing that I can really say about that, like bad about the game itself. It's a fun game. Like I'm playing that. I just played Persona 5 Royal. That was a really fun game. So like there's still games out there, but it's hard for me to like find newer game series that I'm as interested in. So
That's part of being old. We
yeah.
just like the ones that were easier that we played when we were kids. There's gonna be kids growing up today who are like, man, I got time in my life for a Dark Souls. I don't have time to learn all these newfangled games. And I'm like, okay, well, that's just the way the world works. But anyways, my friend, this is a lovely conversation. And if people wanted to come and poke you or game with you or whatever, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Chief is Deaf because my dog's name is Chief and he's deaf. And before I became a Magic the Gathering community member and content creator in the online commander space, I was posting pictures of my dog on Twitter, and I just never changed my Twitter handle since then. They can find us in Discord at discord.gg/playedh. And you can also find us on Twitter at PlayEDH Discord and on playedh.com, where we have like free articles that don't have any ads in them whatsoever. We're the only website that posts weekly professional Magic articles that have absolutely no ads in them whatsoever, I think, in the entire Magic space. As crazy as that probably sounds. Weekly articles from us. And we've also got streams on Twitch. Actually, I just hired Chloe, Queer for Exia, to run more Twitch streams for us so we can have even more Twitch streams for people who want to watch exciting Commander gameplay at a variety of power levels. So, like, we're doing those different things. And, people can find me. I'm fairly active in the format philosophy section of the Rules Committee Discord server, which is where Shivam and I have a lot of our best interactions, such as
where we have our throwdown knockout fight.
cEDH. I don't always agree with everything Shivam says. He doesn't always agree with everything I say. But the important thing is that at the end of the day, we can be friends and be respectful of each other and sit down for an hour to talk about Rule Zero, which is what we did today. So I'll leave it with you there. I had a great time. Really looking forward to hopefully maybe people will hear this and say, hey, I'd like to have that guy on a podcast, and reach out to me and let me know. Or if they don't, that's fine too. There are a lot of people that are a lot more interesting than I am. So, those people should be at the top of your list.
And as always, my friends, you can find me at Gear Reporting Gears. You can find this podcast anywhere podcasts are sold, or at Cool Stuff Inc. every Tuesday, or at YouTube every Tuesday. Thanks to my editor, Dan. And you also find me on Shivam and Wheeler Love Magic, or the Chronicles of Dragonlance podcast, or patreon.com/ShivanB. And remember, my friends, it's not magic without the gathering, and we'll see you next time.